Welcome. Thanks to those of you who are here in person. Welcome everybody who is here online. My name is Rich Dione. I'm the co-director of the Fusion Studio for Entertainment and Engineering here at Purdue.
My name is Mary Pilat, and I'm the co-director of the Fusion Studio.
Fantastic. Thanks for coming to this month's First Friday at the Fusion Studio. We began this online series of First Friday events as a way to build connections across the country in this wide and varied field of entertainment and engineering. We're excited to launch this year's season of events in this new hybrid in-person and remote mode. We're hoping it's working. It may not be, in which case we'll learn some things, but we continue to try to share exciting technologies, projects, and colleagues from across the country. I'm obliged to say we're also really thrilled to be here in the roof galleries, where behind us you can see the Circadian Bloom exhibit by Anna Ridler. We're really thrilled to be able to be here in person. To kick us off this year, we're really thrilled to welcome J.R. Luker here to our left in the room, who is the technical director and scenic designer at Cal State Fullerton, who's joining us all the way from Italy today to talk about his work creating 3D models of historic theater spaces using 3D scanning technologies. 1 hour is a really short amount of time to do anything, so I'm not going to say a whole lot more. We will have some time at the end for questions, but I don't want to take up any more time. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn things over to JR here and let him begin. So welcome, JR. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I really admire this program and what you're doing there at Purdue. I wish we could do it at Cal State Fullerton. It's a great model for us to look ahead to. I'm here to share with you a process that I've been developing over the last 2 years, thank you pandemic, where we've pushed into virtual formats, virtual technologies, and digital technologies, even more than ever before. And what I'm working on is a way of documenting spaces, archiving spaces, using digital technologies like 3D cameras, 360 cameras, and LiDAR scanning, which is light detection and ranging technology, very similar to sonar technology, but with laser light. And so there's a lot to it. There's a lot to unpack, but I'm really excited to share with you what we're doing with historic theaters in particular, but all kinds of venues as well. If you're doing a music video and you need to create a very fast model that's accurate of a location, you can do that with terrestrial scanners using LiDAR. You can also do it with your cell phone, and you can create very accurate, very quickly, models of spaces. And that's essentially what I'm introducing. I'm not the first person to introduce this, but I'm hoping that I can introduce a workflow that is off the shelf, that's readily available to you. You can start with your phone, doing photogrammetry, which is basically using the images in your phone to graph together space, right? And then from there, you can also use LiDAR scanners. A lot of phones today have them, and most phones will have them soon. And these affordable, low-powered lasers emitting from your phone can basically trace space, right? And I'm really simplifying it, but it'll identify surfaces, recognize those surfaces as points and pigments, and essentially translate those things that it sees, and I put that in quotes because it really senses, what it sees, it translates into objects, virtual objects, right? These polygonic forms, if you will. So that's the gist of it. That's the real simple nutshell version of what I'm doing. I'm archiving historic venues in particular because there's a need to create more evidence in our heritage of stagecraft. So part of that goes to who I am. As a theater technician, I'm a practicing technician, I'm a working artist, a professional, a designer as well. And so I'm looking for tools that I can use in my creative process, but I'm also a teacher, and I'm looking for ways to fill the gap of our evolution of entertainment technology. I'm eager to hunt down evidence and the method I'm using is not probably unfamiliar to many of you. You probably work with digital models and computer-aided drafting, and that's how I got to it. Eventually, I was working on a virtual reality production, an art project, actually, where we were sort of cinematically creating a virtual reality world, very similar to gaming world designs, environments, and assets and things like this that we were creating. And I rediscovered photogrammetry through that, and that there were so many apps out there on my phone that I could practice it during COVID and create these assets, these models that I could then upload in 3D print or use in renderings and use them as design tools, essentially. But even like 10 years ago, they were using LiDAR scanners as terrestrial scanners, meaning that they would place a scanner, a high-powered laser system that would have a gyroscope and a GPS, and it would recognize where it was and how it was moving on Earth, right? How the Earth was moving. And then it would start to identify places or distances of the light that it was projecting, the laser light. It would recognize the distance away, it would sense it, it would do the trigonometry of it, and then start to put these points as data points together. So on the image on the right, you probably recognize this famous building in Paris, right, the Notre Dame. It was being documented in 2015 and shared, right? And you'd probably seen the version of this in Assassin's Creed if you're a gamer, right? And these documents were put together and actually called back when the building caught on fire to use it to recreate the architecture, to figure out how historically they were able to build this structure. The LiDAR scans were so accurate and so complete from both the LiDAR scans done originally in 2015 and then Assassin's Creed's version. They were able to take those models and recreate computer-aided models to figure out how to rebuild the structure. And that triggered something in me when I heard that. I was so interested. And I thought, well, we have all these historic buildings that also need to be documented, and they're very vulnerable to wear and tear, to fire, right? We have a famous history with fire, to earthquakes, and most recently wars, and you think about the aggression in the Ukraine, especially with Mariupol, these theaters that are very vulnerable. We need a way of archiving them. One, so that if something does happen, we can go back and potentially recreate them, renovate them, but also we can track wear and tear. We can track how to use these spaces more appropriately and more efficiently, and we can provide access to a world that most people will never know. I'm lucky. I'm presenting from Italy. I'm at a conference where I'm presenting this workflow as well to the Perspective Association of Historic Theaters of Europe as a way of archiving their historic theaters, their heritage. And in particular, I'm very interested in documenting how machines of the past were put together, right, with simple tools, lumber, simple joinery, how they were able to use mechanics historically in the storytelling, how they use entertainment technology in particular to transform a space for an audience, indoors, outdoors, but mostly indoors. And I'm most curious about the influence of the Italian Renaissance and how technology was transferred and evolved over time and place as different cultures adapted it and tweaked it to their own needs, their own existing architectures, their own abilities to industrialize or to create these scenic spectacles of the past, right? So I'm tracking from the Renaissance through the Baroque period, and I'm sort of closing up my research on the industrial age as theaters evolved from these aristocratic nobility venues where there were private performances for court audiences, to eventually municipal, more public performances, and eventually to these civic theaters, these public-private ventures, where they have much smaller budgets, but I would say quite a bit of innovation along the way. So that's where I'm heading with it. And I have to put a container around it. So the buildings need to be over 100 years old. So that means I'll always have new buildings, right, over time. But I'm trying to focus on these buildings. And you can go to the historic route that I'm following in my research process. If you go to the European route of historic theaters, which is part of Perspective, which is why I'm here in Italy. So if you go to that website, you can see for yourself a whole list of theaters. And you can also find a database full of information about those theaters that I'm trying to capture. And what I'm trying to do in the archival process is provide free, absolutely free, open source, open building information, open BIM, to anyone who's interested, right? This idea of open source, I hope is contagious and will spread, become a value that we all share. It's an ambitious thought. I hope it does work. But I'm trying to augment what's already there. And when we go back and we look at our historical records, what's available, it's ephemeral, right? It dies with the next generation, especially the practice and use. And when it comes to stagecraft in particular, stagecraft as architecture, as a practice, right? These different versions of identifying stagecraft, we don't have very good evidence. We have drawings, we have photographs, we have personal experience records, first-person impressions of audience members, and all of those primary documents are out there. But today we have the ability to create virtual models, to capture reality in a way we never were able to do before. And we're able to do it in a way that the models that we can form out of point clouds, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, have so much data in them that we can add colorized data. We can look at design and architecture. We can look at lighting and mood as a snapshot, as a time capsule, if you will, of space right now. And so that's a fascinating idea, right? That we can put together these worlds that anyone, anywhere can experience for free if they have access to a phone or a computer. They can fly through the model. We can animate videos of them to make them more accessible. Or if they have digital means, or if they have a mean of virtual reality like goggles or halo lenses, they can have an augmented or mixed reality experience, or a pure, what we think of as a pure virtual experience of these spaces. They can walk through these worlds, fly through the walls if they want, or we can portal place to place. I'm imagining a lot of the audience for this talk is familiar with gaming and has had some interaction with virtual reality, either gaming or some sort of entertainment experience that's virtual. So these digital archives that I'm working towards are based out of these 3D scans, right? And these 3D scans are basically raw data, right? They're coordinates in space. And the coordinates in space are described as point clouds, but they're millions of points in space. And it's a three-dimensional world that you can interact with, you can move through. You can also use as a design tool, right? So looking at a point cloud from a 3D scanning perspective, there's a lot of ways to get this information. If you think about it as coordinates and data, that's the way I think about it. It's just billions of points of data that you're putting together in a environment that's virtual, that is ready to be transformed into other ways of representing that space. We can remove the color and look at it purely as a surface of a connected network of particles, if you will, digital particles, right? We can think about it as a density of surface points, if you want, or you can think about it as polygons. If you start to connect these dots as surfaces into polygons, if you're a video game designer or a modeler, someone who works with modeling in CAD, for example, it would be an easy translation to go from point cloud to a polygonic model. And the way that you can use this information to preserve as is, as built current conditions, to me is just fascinating, right? To be able to experience firsthand what a place is as a moment in time in our history is fascinating. And we know that we need this way of seeing a space, of experiencing it, but we don't really know yet, like, all of the potential and all of the risks, which, going into it at first, I was sort of dumbfounded by, well, why haven't we used this before, and why is this still new, right? Because we've had this technology for a good long time. But then I run into these other quandaries as I start to experience more and more with 3D scanning and creating these digital archives of spaces that, there's some risks involved. And so the juice and squeeze equation, right? Is this worth it? Can we continue down this road? Deserves some more deliberation, I found. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this for historic sites in particular. One, obviously, for a historical record in a way that is so detailed. We've never had anything comparable, right? The other thing is it supplements and adds to our existing records of videos, for example, and it allows us to put a timestamp in place together. And that's kind of interesting to me. Preserving it as a 3D model enables us to do other things with it as well, to be creative with a space and to sort of shift away the wear and tear that these historic venues in particular have been experiencing when they allow access. And then, of course, the point of access, right? How do you get access to these spaces? Do you have to travel to them, right? Well, you don't have to leave home now to see this space. It becomes the way of you getting to know a venue, of being curious about it, of exploring it without having the worry of that you're going to damage the space, that you're going to cause some other concerns with it. And providing access is the key motivator of OpenBIM, right? Of having this free open source archive available to anyone to use for research, to use as a creative exercise. But with that, I think we also need some conditions to prevent it from being abused as well. So what I hope to share with you is the method that I'm using in the hopes that it'll catch fire, right? That it's contagious, that you all find it so interesting and so easy that you go out and you start documenting your own spaces. That would be a dream come true. And so I want to walk you through the process, some of the equipment, what to look for. And then hopefully you're curious enough to go out and try it yourself, or have me come out and I'll try it with you. And then hopefully you can take it from there. But I'm hoping this is a multiplier, right? That this method is out there and that you challenge the method, that you come up with better ways, and then you come back and teach me. That's on you, okay? So first of all, we want to document the space and create these models. So we need to go into the space and actually set it up so that we can record the space accurately. And we want to make sure that it's the best possible situation for us, that you don't have a bunch of people moving through the space, that you don't have a set being loaded in as you're trying to record it. That would be a very interesting moment to choose, right? So you have to have the right conditions. And when you have the right conditions, you also need the equipment that you can afford, right? You can rent LiDAR scanning equipment. I've done this. It's quite easy. You can rent the software. You can purchase a license if you're so inclined. You can also buy some equipment that's off the shelf that you may have already had some familiarity with it if you're someone who's doing video games, for example. So this process is pretty approachable. Once you have the equipment in the place, then you conduct the scans, and then you need a place to put those scans together, right? You need to register these points of information. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, about how to put multiple scans together to combine them. Combining the scans, you can use just raw point clouds, or you can convert them to polygons. You can also do it with 3D imagery, spherical cameras. You can do thousands of pictures and then put together using photogrammetry to find objects that share pixels of color information, share edges, surfaces like that. So photogrammetry is a little bit of a different topic, but they are related. And so you can come at it either way. If you don't have a LiDAR scanner on your phone, for example, a lot of the same apps will use your camera in your phone to document or take snapshots. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way and put together 80 photographs of a rock, and then you'll be able to form a polygonic surface that's recognizable to you in color, right? So once we have the scans combined, then we have multiple points of view, right? Now we want to take those scans and export the polygons, or what I prefer, the point clouds, to a CAD system, AutoCAD, Revit, Vectorworks. They all have plug-in tools now that will allow you to import the point clouds and then manipulate the point clouds. But there are a fleet of softwares out there that'll let you modify and pre-register your point clouds together to get them to align and to sort of set coordinates for the origins of these scans. Keep in mind that the environments are three-dimensional. So when you're doing a coordinate, it's a point in space. It has to be very accurate, and you have to align the points of view very accurately. But once you register those points of view, you start mapping together these multiple positions around an environment, and you get three-dimensional objects essentially, or you get partial forms if you don't register all of the edges together. And there's ways of overcoming that, but it'll be a little inaccurate when you do that. We create these 3D models at the end of this process that are exportable. You can reduce the polygons, you can reduce the complexity, you can re-render the environments to transform them. For example, if you were doing a theater show, you could scan the space, which I did recently for a recital hall. Then you have a model of the actual seats of the audience, the walls, where the actual equipment is in the lighting, and you compare the point cloud model to your the old-fashioned way of building the model in a virtual way from drafting. You can compare your fantasy drawings to the more realistic version of the 3D scan, and that's their software to compare that, which I'll introduce here in a little bit. And then, of course, it's about sharing these models in a way that is accessible to an audience. So if you're a researcher, there'll be a more in-depth virtual model, a higher resolution model, if you need that access, or if you just want to see it on your phone. I have an example here on the screen where Immerso, a company that's doing construction technology in Norway, in Oslo, they scan the National Theater there, and you can see in a low-res, low point, a heavy, thick point, you can see a point cloud 3D model on your phone. If you go to Immerso, you can see their sample data. And of course, you can import sample data and try it out on your own if you have AutoCAD or Vectorworks or Revit. So this summer, I had the pleasure of traveling quite a bit, and I visited the historic theaters on the Nordic route. And the Nordic route, I only did Scandinavian countries in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And I did essentially 11 weeks of travel where I would spend a week in a venue and 3D scan it and then move on to another one. And then sometimes I would scan a theater in a day or two, depending on the amount of access to the historic theater that they would give me. And I was using a number of scanning types, different equipment. One of the pieces of equipment you can see in this picture on the stage of the Drottningholm Theater, which is just outside of Stockholm. It's a palace theater that would only be used in the summers, and it was built in 1766. And it's the only historic theater with original 18th century stage technology. And I was fortunate enough to do nearly 1,000 scans, over 1 billion points of data collected from the entire building, inside, outside, in the basement, in the attic, all over this building. But in the nooks and crannies, I found myself not able to access completely with the large, more intense BLK 360, which is in that picture there, the micro laser scanner. That particular scanner uses spherical imagery. So it has a camera system that takes like slices of pie, but in 360. It takes full spherical photographs, basically 300-degree fields of view, and then stitches those 360 images together. And then on top of that, after it has the spherical imagery, it overlays a very intense, dense, high-resolution point cloud recording, puts those together as a package of data, and then you repeat that. So out of all of the scans, I have about 700 plus scans that are functioning from that. And then I have additional scans that were taken with handheld equipment that is readily accessible, right? So this camera right here, for example, is a depth camera. It's from Intel RealSense, and I'll talk about that. It's a pretty affordable way of recording space. And then there's a LiDAR version of that, small as a tennis ball, if you will. It's very lightweight. You can put it on a drone, or you can put it on the end of a stick like I did and, do a LiDAR scan. And then there's the old kinetic style camera, which some of you may recognize from video games of the early 2000s. So that would be used for motion detection on video games, but it's also recording space. So they've adapted this at Dot 3D products, or Dot products as it's called online. So these different cameras with a tablet or your phone, you can record spaces pretty quickly and affordably, or you can rent BLK, as I did over the summer, and record lots of spaces in high resolution. When you're recording a space like this, you can see a sample of the Drottningholm Theater. Each of those yellow orbs are a terrestrial scan, a 360 scan on a tripod. They're sort of floating in space orbs. And you can see, like, against the walls, there's like a shadow or a reflection, or actually it's noise that you see there, where you see that sort of light green orb on the wall, or circle on the wall. That's noise from the scanner being too close, right? Of having too much energy, if you will, laser energy to record, or not enough time. If you see the dark shadow that's on the inside, that's that particular scan not picking up the information because it bounced away too fast to be sensed with this global scanning system that the BLK 360 uses. So when you have multiple scans, you can you can get a chandelier, which is a really hard thing to normally draw or draft. You can get a chandelier with a light bulb to show up in your 3D models, which is very rare, right? You can get edges of 1-inch flats, and you can even get so close to see the chisel marks on these scans. You can get up and see the nail heads of the flats. You can see the marks of the person who chiseled their name into the piece of lumber that built the theater, right? You can get incredibly detailed models, or you can reduce the number of polygons and reduce the number of points, so you can really quickly navigate through these spaces and take a look at them, and then zoom in on the areas that you want to know more about. So it allows you a lot of data really easily and quickly, and allows you to put these scans together. This particular group of scans I put together with the Immerso app, which is something I've been working on as far as like an emerging software. This company I chose because they're open bin, and they were interested in learning as much as I was about how to use this technology to archive space, right? And they use it in a different way. They use it as a means of recognizing when new construction, doesn't match the fantasy version that the designer or the architect came up with. When a plumber or HVAC person puts something in the wrong place, they go in with a 3D scanner and recognize it before the walls are enclosed, before they have to change the permits and what have you. So they compare models. And this is really interesting to me because 10 years from now, I want to come back to the Drottning Home. I want to come back to these theaters and compare models. And of course, the technology will be much more advanced than, let's hope. So this BLK, I was using a first generation, and over the summer, I heard rumors that a new version was coming out, right? And it has been released. If you can get your hands on one, great. But it's about a $25,000 piece of equipment when you include all of the accessories, and then you have to pay for the software. Lyco Geosystems provides wonderful software, and there's educational license, by the way, just in case you want that, Rich. So there are educational licenses available to students and to professionals if you're using it in your classrooms and your laboratories. And I took this scanner and I used it with the Immerso app because I was testing both dot product, dot 3D editing tools, and Leica with Immerso, and comparing which of these softwares would give us the quickest, easiest, most reliable and accurate information repeatedly. And I'm doing 1,000 scans over this time. So comparing phone apps and handheld use, Intel cameras, dot product cameras, and also the Leica terrestrial scanners. Comparing all this data really gave me a sense of when and where, and it taught me as I went through this process, like for example, this image on the left, when my scanner was just too close to the ceiling. Here I am above the stage machinery in the upper attics of the Drottning Home Theater, where very, very few people are ever allowed to go, right? And I'm taking 50 scans just from above the beams in this attic, and without doing any other scans, all the adjacent objects that I wasn't planning to recognize became visible from these 50 scans that I did above the beams. But the beams themselves were too close for recognizing with these orbs, but I got them when I did the next level below. So I worked my way from head to toe and below, right below the decks, to capture all of the stage machinery, every single fiber of rope, every pulley, the way they tied the knots. I even got the playing cards that the stagehands used in the attic. I've got those in the 3D scan. I can see the hand that they were dealt, right? Poor guy. So it was quite fun to go through and register all these scans together and see what information I could read from these scans and how much was too much. And honestly, when you look at this picture and you recognize how many orbs, this was a day of my life, right? To crawl through this attic, to get up above to get there. But as I was there, I wasn't just scanning. I was photographing in every chisel mark, every signature by the stagehand in 1790s. I was seeing things that I probably wouldn't have normally seen as a benefit because these scans take a few minutes to record the data, and then I have to register them one to the other to make sure that the origin points are linked together. So I'm spending the time in between scans, putting one scan next to another and making sure they're correct, that they align correctly in an XY way. From a top view, and then from a Z way in the side view, making sure those positions match, and then moving on around the theater as I go and taking photographs and just paying attention in depth to these spaces and archiving them in addition to 3D modeling, archiving them with spherical 360 cameras, 360 video, and of course traditional photography. So when you're looking at these spaces and you're trying to figure out if your models are working, if your scans are working, you very quickly, within minutes, you start to see the space, right? And it's very gratifying to be able to see 50 meters away an object that's the other side of the room. And you start to build this really dense, rich model that you can fly through, that you can investigate, you can put on VR goggles and experience in a way that you probably wouldn't be able to do even in person. It opens up walls, right? You fly through and you can start to model a space and see a space where it becomes very easily recognizable to anyone who's worked on a computer, who's done drafting or modeling. You can fly through the space and you can create instant orthographic drawings. You can create instant perspective views in color, and you can control the density of those models so that you can see adjacent issues or adjacent surfaces, areas, spaces, and you can start to draw connections of the space, right? You can connect the dots because there aren't walls in the way of seeing. And it's pretty interesting to do that. You can also change how you see it. If you don't want to see color, you can see just the points as far as the density of points. And then you can start to see it in another way, removing the points and creating polygonic surfaces. So these two different views allow you to recognize things that you don't normally recognize because they're camouflaged to our eyes, right? That we see surfaces differently, which is fascinating to me as a byproduct, right? You can also do this outdoors. So here's 17 scans stitched together. You can see me sort of as a ghost in this courtyard. I'm there on this royal palace grounds, and there's 5 buildings that are part of this arts structure adjacent to the main palace. And there in front is the Drottningholm main entrance, the royal entrance. And you can see my little figure there, a shadow of myself as the scan picked up an edge of me or another edge of me as I moved around the space. And I kind of thought that was interesting because I got tired of hiding, actually, because it's a 360 camera and I'm out in the middle of this open courtyard. But you can kind of see that it's interesting that you're a ghost, right? That this moment where I'm walking through the laser field, it's registering the part that it sees at that second, that moment. And to me, it's fascinating to think about space that way. Now, using the software that I use is just one of many that are out there, but I worked with this company in Oslo, Norway. One, they're Scandinavian, and I was documenting Scandinavian theaters this summer. But two, it's one of the very rare companies whose business model allows you to keep the data that you collect as your data, right? You can export it, you can treat it as your own. And the other company I'm also working with is Dot Product, and they're an international company as well, that allows you to own the data that you create. A lot of the applications out there currently, their business model is to reduce the cost of the software and the use of their equipment, but you are giving them rights to your models, to your spaces. And as we start to talk about the metaverse and the morality of the metaverse, whatever that may be, it's undetermined for sure. I like to think that if we're going to have an open BIM, open archive spaces, that we can sort of limit access in one way, but own that original right to grant access if it gets out of hand. Like if someone tries to steal a virtual real estate and turn it into an NFT, an non-fungible, right? If they're trying to create a blockchain asset of a historic theater and then they have, not so great intentions, it could be problematic, right? So Immersive is one of those companies that allows you to not just use their platform to help register. It has a lot of different uses. We just didn't use it the way that they intended, right? We're not using it for construction comparison, we're using it for archival. So on their app, it's a wonderful online app, and there's also a tablet version that you use in the field. You basically pre-register everything on their tablet, and then you upload, and they have AI registering surfaces for you, which saves a ton of time. So I didn't have to be as careful when I was registering these different orbs in the space. I can get them approximate, and then AI would say, oh yeah, that space has this surface, or this scan has this surface. I recognize this in the other 15 scans. I'm going to join those surfaces together using AI. It just simplifies the process and makes it intuitive in a way that even humans would probably suffer over. And the software online allows you to be much faster. And it's very accurate. It also provides you with a controllable model that you can reduce the number of points, you can increase or decrease the brightness of the pigments or the, not pigments, pixels that represent the pigments. You can increase the lighting, you can change the size of the points, you can also create instantly section views in orthographic or projection perspectives. So this tool allows you to isolate, it allows you to see holistically the environment, it allows you to change the intensity from, say, 2 million points of data for a space to 80 million within seconds. There's obviously a lot more points in a space the size of this theater. This is the Confidencen, which is in Solna, just outside of the main part of Stockholm. And it's the historic theater that had the stage burned down. And then they rebuilt the stage. So I was there with the person who helped rebuild the stage and who knew all the stage machinery, and I was granted access by this theater. But their house, the main venue, was reconstructed because it was preserved over hundreds of years, and then they resurrected it, if you will. So here we have documentation of the stage machinery that was renovated off of their best guess, and I mean really great guesses, right? Well-informed academic guesses. And then you have this, the rest of the building that is 17th century building. It was actually a riding training stable house just outside of the palace, just up the street. So it was a court theater that was remote. It was a purpose-built building as a riding school that was converted to a court theater and then remained a court theater, and then was lost and preserved because it was forgotten. Right. So here we have evidence of it as it is today in a way that no one has, right? No one has this type of information. And we have it in a way that we can see the adjacent rooms, we can see the stage machinery, and we have all of these different settings, as you can see on the left side of the app, different things that we can turn on and off to make packages of scans visible or invisible, right? There's a lot of flexibility built into this style of recording space. So,
JR, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. JR.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a lag, and I didn't know if you heard me. I hate to interrupt, but we got about 10 minutes left, and I'm mindful that we're starting to get some questions.
Okay.
It's so fascinating. I don't want to cut you off, but we probably need to start to wrap it up pretty soon.
Okay. Well, let me just introduce a couple of things, and then we can get to some questions. Okay, great. So the handheld scanning process is really exciting, right? Especially if you're already able to use a phone and you're familiar with the tablet and software, you can get access to handheld scanning right now. And it's really affordable. For a couple $100, you can buy an Intel D455 or LiDAR, the L515, right? Or even you can upgrade to a short range scanner like this from Dot3D products. So you're not in it with a lot of investment, but you can create models of assets right now. Assets like artifacts. You can 3D scan your actors in costume, in makeup, and have a 3D model to put in your renderings, right? You can 3D scan prop furniture. And this is a very straightforward, easy process. And there's even a free application that you can try out to see if you like it on the Dot3D website. They have a iOS version that just came out. So if you have an iPhone, you can use the recently released version. I was on the beta test for that. And it's really exciting to be able to put on a device or to use your phone camera to record these spaces and to do it anywhere, anytime you want. And then online, you can have these files that you can then export to whatever software system you want to use as a modeling or drafting software. And you can edit them in their software online and then upload them, and they're yours. They're your models. And you can edit these models. You can reduce the poor data. You can pull out poor data. You can crop out what you don't want in a picture. If you want just a ground plan of a dance studio, for example, it's very easy and straightforward to do. So moving on, the last thing I'm going to mention is that I'm continuing this process and I'm following this route of historic theaters of Europe as a starting point because it matches my personal interests in research. And I'm starting at the top in that blue route, the Nordic route. And this summer, I'm hoping to do more of the Empire route. There's a lot of great theaters down there in the Czech Republic. And hopefully at the end of the PQ 2023, I can get down there and then go back up to the Nordic route. But year after year, I'm hoping to continue to document these spaces and then upload these models for all of you. So,
fantastic. Thank you. Now I want to go on a road trip. I want to follow that map. Thank you so much. There's so much information there, and I have 1,000 questions, but Lauren in the back tells us that we've got a couple of questions from some folks online. Do you want to share one? Gotcha. So JR, Mary asks, how do you go about planning where you're going to put your scanner and how many points you're going to use for each scan?
That's great. Try to get as many points as you can, always, right? And then learning from the equipment, like just exercising the equipment and trying it out, trial and error. I learned that, if you have a sweet spot for handheld is based off of the calibration of the cameras, whether it's a LiDAR recording sensor or if it's a set of stereo optic, like your eyes, seeing around a space, it does the trigonometry with a depth camera. They have different ranges. And so the D455 depth camera, the sweet spot is basically 0.5 meter away, no closer than that, will create a polygonic model for you. And then up to, I would say, 6 or 9 meters, it's also capturing those surfaces. If you use some sort of registration system, like a checkerboard pattern, like a QR code type thing, it can also recognize the QR codes. And then as you move around a space, it'll re-register when it sees those things. And then it'll help you align those points of view. So with the terrestrial scanner, you don't want to be closer than a meter. Like if you're closer than a meter, you get that shadow effect where it doesn't have enough time to come back and be sensed. So it needs some time to send out the laser and then to do the mathematics.
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you. Lauren, were there more questions?
Yes. Do you ever use Matterport cameras in this work?
Gina asks, do you ever use Matterport cameras in this work that you're doing?
Love it.
I hope
Absolutely.
you know what that is.
It's a 360 camera system. A lot of real estate agents are using Matterport, for example, to document their virtual experiences of the home, right? It's off the shelf, easy to use, love it.
Gotcha. Yeah, Lauren.
That says, with these domestic short-range scanners, what's the largest volume you can scan? For example, can I do a 400?
I'm going to paraphrase, because I'm not going to remember all those words, but Scott asks, what's the largest space you can scan? And I think he's asking specifically about his space, which is about a 420-seat proscenium space. Could he do that with some of these domestic cameras that you've been talking about?
So if you think about Google Earth, they're using LiDAR scanning on an airplane, right, to register. So it's really how big is your memory and how high def is your model. So I can reduce the number of points and have a very, very large model. My computer will be fine. But when I get into like the Drottningholm, which is a very large building with a lot of different surfaces and rooms and a lot of detail, I've got 1 billion points of data in one building. So I haven't found the limit, but I've learned to work within the limits of the processing power of my computer so it doesn't overheat or crash. And I can work on the model and register the points.
I just had an image of your computer catching fire in the middle of some theater, which probably wouldn't be a good thing. Lauren, we keep getting more questions, yeah?
Yeah, so one question is how can beginners start? Is there a place for all different solutions?
The question is, how does somebody who's never done this before get started? And do you have some of the information that you've talked about in terms of how to get started archived somewhere where they could sort of follow a quick and easy tutorial or something?
Yeah, so I'm happy to share my process. You can email me, jrnluker@fullerton.edu. Please ask, and I will be happy to send you my workflow and what I'd recommend. I'd have conversations with you, video chat, whatever you want to do. I'm hoping that you'll catch the bug, right? The easiest way to start on your phone. You're carrying around everywhere anyway, and model your sofa, model your chairs. Take a 3D model of an actor on stage. Do it a lot,
Yeah, or your dog. Yeah. So we'll capture some of that contact information as well and put it on the Fusion Studio website, so you can find it there as well. They keep coming in. So Lauren, go ahead. What's the next one?
So Mary says, really enjoyed the talk. What building are you most looking forward to scanning in the future?
So the question is, what building are you most looking forward to scanning in the future?
Oh, wow. The Český Krumlov is the next building that I'd love to scan, and Teatro Olimpico, right? I'm actually in Savianeta right now. I would love to scan that theater. But of course, these are historic spaces, and so they even worry about the dust catching on fire. That's a real thing. So like when you say my computer overheating, that is absolutely something I'm concerned about. Even like an LED light source that I use to sort of project light on the surfaces so I can read them better. I have to be very mindful of the batteries and where they're charging. I can't leave a room with them because these are very sensitive, irreplaceable spaces.
That is amazing. That alone is amazing. Lauren, there's another one, right?
The last question so far is from Gina. What VR software do you use to view?
The question is, what VR software do you use to view your scans? I imagine there's a couple, but
so I'm a total geek when it comes to virtual reality, and I want to experience these spaces again and again and again without having to travel there, have jet lag. So any 3D viewer that you want to use, you can use. You just got to find the workaround so that your model becomes recognizable in their viewer. There are free viewers out there that you can use. I've already mentioned a few of them, but if you get one of these Intel cameras, you can even take their software, like it's free SDK that you can code yourself a viewer if you want. And they have a free viewer from Intel RealSense online that you can download. I would start there, turn your camera on, see what it looks like with LiDAR scanner, see what it looks like with the depth camera, do a couple of recordings of an object, of a space, and then export it to different 3D viewers out there. There's hundreds now. So.
Wow. That's fascinating. I think that's the last of our online questions. Mary, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I have 1,000 questions, but I'll just ask one. So you mentioned a little bit about the squeeze, and that kind of alluded to some ethical concerns, and you even spoke to a couple ethical concerns. Do you see that some of the people that you're encountering, or maybe the places that you're requesting to access, have concerns that kind of fall into that ethics of care bucket?
Absolutely. So even the tourist spots, right, that have people walking through them have concerns about exposure, right? The Drottningholm Theater, it's one of my favorite venues. It's extremely rare, right? I'm really privileged to be in that space. But right from the start, they had me sign a contract, about the use of imagery and recording the space. They gave me rights to do it with limitations. And so I always have to go to, in this case, the royal court and ask permission, the government of Sweden, right, and the administrators there below, to have permission to release images, to release these models if they want them. And there's a discussion happening in the background where they are also wondering if we should, and if so, under what conditions would be responsible. So this conversation is not going to end. I also have had questions from administrators at these palaces in particular, where it's very sensitive. There are places that people can go, and then there are places that they don't want them to go. And on one side, they want to create a means of people experiencing these spaces that are unsafe for other people to physically go in, because they haven't stood on that board for 300 years. They don't know if it'll hold a human being, right? Literally an experience I had this summer there. So they're trying to give access, but limited at the same time. They're using this virtual means as a way of sharing this heritage, this special place, and also reducing the wear and tear on these spaces. So it benefits in some way, but they're nervous that someone will create a virtual experience of their own using these models in their venues, and now their name is tarnished, or their identity is now ill-reproved. So it's a problematic thing, especially with the metaverse. It's the Wild West of the new internet, right?
Yeah, that last part's a really fascinating point, right? As you were presenting, I was thinking about how cool it would be to do a performance in our space and then have it virtually appear in the theater that you're scanning. But there's a lot of questions about that, right? Like, are they going to be comfortable with us in that space, even virtually, right? It's a brave new world, right? Isn't that an overused phrase for this kind of thing? But any questions here in the room before we start to wrap up? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. This was really great. Thanks, JR, for making some time. It's probably close to dinner time for you where you are, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
No, lunchtime? I don't know what the difference is. Just as a reminder, our next First Friday event is on November 4th at noon Eastern Time. where we'll be joined by Jason Pontius, who's the Director of Operations at Smart Monkeys, which is a firm focused on entertainment controls and integration, including such large-scale installations as the New York Spring Spectacular at Radio City Music Hall, Universal Studios Orlando's New Lagoon Show and Parade, the MGM Cotai Integrated Resort in Macau, China, and the George W. Bush Presidential Center video wall in Dallas, Texas. Thank you all very much. Thanks, JR. I keep looking over here, but you're over there in the camera. So thank you all. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.